Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining, and I'm so sorry for this technical issue. Thank you for tuning in and for waiting for us to discuss how to connect physical and digital touch points for Omnichannel Excellence. Brought to you in partnership with Merge. I would like to firstly introduce our moderator, is Pat McGloin, Managing Director, Health and Life Sciences from Merge. Pat, you can take the stand.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and apologies for the network outage here with the platform, but I'm glad we were able to make it work, and looking forward to an exciting conversation with my two esteemed guests here. I'll start with Jenna Rodewald. Jenna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Pat. Happy to be here. I'm Jenna Rodewald, and I've led digital strategy and omnichannel marketing for over a decade in biotech and pharma. I'm on the marketing client brand side of things, and I've worked on rare disease brands, and I've worked on large DTC brands.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Bracy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, John Bracy, Chief Data and Performance Officer at Merge. Have worked in data and performance architecture for the last 15 years with a deep specialization within the healthcare space.
Excellent. All right, well, let's dive right in. Like we do with everything in omnichannel marketing, we like to begin with the customer journey. Jenna, how can pharma marketers effectively map the customer journey across digital and offline touchpoints?
Thanks, Pat. So I like to think of this really from the customer's point of view. So if you take an example like a patient who is diagnosed maybe at a young age, but your product is for adults 18 and over, right? So you want to think about where they are in the journey, right? So if they're already diagnosed, you're probably not going to do a lot in the diagnosis phase from a marketing, any touch points there, but you want to look at where they're looking for information as an adult. Are they looking for a treatment? Are they just looking to manage their symptoms? And start to think about all the different places that they are. Different generations have different ways of interacting. I worked on a brand that had, women in their 80s. They're maybe not on TikTok, so you want to think about different ways to reach them. And I can tell you at that time, print was really effective. If you think about, the QR codes and the resurgence of QR codes, I've seen a way that you can take a print piece, make sure that there's a digital touch point on it, like a QR code, track that from the back end so that you can see all of the UTMs on where that came from, and then start to map that they actually got on treatment, maybe from reading that brochure and that QR code. So I thought, I know there's a lot about like technology and data and all of these bells and whistles. It's just some simple things sometimes work best, but my perspective is just always start where the customer is. If you're focusing just on your product benefits and pushing them out in different channels, you're not going to be as effective. You really need to think about what that customer needs at that point in time.
Bracy, any thoughts from a data perspective when thinking about mapping the customer journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one reason, pharma marketing is so interesting from a data perspective is we have arguably the most complete data set in marketing. So all of our doctors are connected by, effectively a human device graph. So we have an NPI, which can tie terrestrial touch points with digital touch points and really have a very clean version and very clean view into the customer journey. What makes pharma difficult? Obviously, we have regulations, and we should have regulations around pharma, but it's the wealth of information. So it's less about connecting, and it's more about being able to run good statistics and good analytics on those data so that we are avoiding false positives from pure correlations and really looking at root cause analytics. There's a lot of ways to do that. I think when you start thinking about ROI and attribution, media mix modeling is very important when it comes to pharma advertising and pharma marketing. So you're kind of wading through the wealth of data and information that you have and getting to the true North Star truth of what's happening in your plans.
Excellent. Yeah, as I think through the connection of field interactions with digital communications, it's really an important step in that journey work, right? Thinking about how you can collect this data from all of those tactical elements that you've got in motion, whether they are direct mail pieces or physical pieces like Jenna was alluding to, or your traditional digital touch points. Another interesting thing that we've done is we've mapped the sales journey, because one way to think about this is as the sales rep as your end user. So how can you empower them to be more effective in their day-to-day interactions, as it's typically for most pharma companies your most expensive channel. So you want to make sure you're getting the most out of that channel. And one way to do that is to take the time to really empathize with the activities of the field sales organization and really understand what a typical day is like and how we can help empower them to have more effective conversations with those HCPs who are more and more difficult to get access to, are more pressed for time. So if you're going to have a hard time getting to someone, and then when you actually have that time, it's 5 minutes or less, how can we make sure that the rep is armed with all of the information that is available to help them have the most productive conversation as possible? And the other thing to think about is, how do you keep that conversation going between those touch points? So a rep might get out to a given doctor maybe once a month. And so what's happening? How are we connecting with that doctor in those 3 to 4 weeks in between those touch points to keep advancing their understanding of our given therapy? So some things to really think about in terms of how to empower the field sales organization with the data and the interaction information that we have from all of these great omnichannel efforts. So moving to the next question, I think you, Bracy, touched on some of the benefits of the data that we have access to in life sciences. But what are some of, maybe Jenna, you can start with this one. What are some of the unique data challenges that pharma marketers face, and what are some of the ways that we can address them compliantly?
I'll focus on two very important things that I've learned throughout my career, is that your data needs to be clean and scrubbed, and the ability to be able to ingest the data in a way that makes sense with your systems. So you can do all the bells and whistles of omnichannel marketing, but if your data is not clean and synced, it really doesn't matter. It's garbage in, garbage out, right? So focusing on your data and your data systems and the way that you can properly ingest it really makes a difference. And then the other part that is also critical is just the real-time nature of it. So if you're ingesting all this data, it's great information, but if it's not synced real time, and I'll give you an example of that. So if you're marketing to healthcare professionals and with HCP data, it's great because it's so targeted. You know exactly from down to the MPI number who has engaged with your marketing. If we don't learn about it till 6 months later, or we don't serve that up to our sales team, that is irrelevant, right? So those are my 2 points, is just clean data and real-time nature.
Jenna, I love the real-time piece of it, and just kind of reacting to that. It's so important to be in the moment and be relevant with data, because there's such a latency, and once you have that latency, it's no longer relevant. So always a good example that I think of is, if we have a rep go into a HCP's office and detail them on the efficacy of a drug, we want to pay off either a complimentary or a kind of next best action message in media or in email, but it has to be within the right window, or it loses relevance and it's just noise. So that time in between when we want to act and when we do act is arguably one of the most critical things we can do when you're thinking about omni-channel strategy.
Excellent. And what strategies can be employed to break down those data silos and align teams across platforms? I think one of the things we hear a lot in helping clients advance their digital maturity and help them advance their omnichannel approach is that they're dealing with many different data silos, and often those data silos fall under different functional heads. And so just trying to get everyone aligned can be a challenge, and really the first challenge in starting on your omnichannel journey. So Jenna, any thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting. And to add to that, there's sometimes a lot of different platforms that the different teams use. So if I look at what marketing might use to deploy content such as emails, and I look at what the sales team uses to track activity or find their customers, to what maybe IT uses, those could be three different things. There's three different platforms that are being used. So it's really important to align that, the importance that all of these systems are connected, and it's really, a MarTech stack that works all together. A lot of this needs to come from leadership and making sure that everyone's aligned, that we are building a connected system and that people can't go off and build their own things. There's a lot of companies out there that some folks probably on the phone, right, that you're going through a digital transformation. And, my advice is that, making sure that there is a central customer data platform that everybody is tapped into, and that as much as it sounds really cool and sexy to talk about next best action or any journey mapping and customer experience, those are all really great things. But if you don't really have everything in one place to start with from a customer data platform and connecting those different teams, you're never going to get to this omni-channel journey.
Excellent point. Bracy, any thoughts to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of add another piece to it is, you have to create a shared sense of ownership across stakeholders. It's so important that the project, kind of ticks all the boxes, whether it's, within people's performance agreements or whether it's just recognition within the organization. You have to be thoughtful in each one of the stakeholders. What's in it for me? I mean, that's realistically how we work in organizations. So we're doing this, for the greater good of the organization, but also the greater good of our teams and our, kind of our standing. So being thoughtful about that and just recognizing it up front, it seems simple, but it is so important, as we as we build this out. I think that you have to get with each one of these stakeholders and get requirements, on the upfront. But then the other side of the coin is you have to have a thoughtful view on what are too many requirements and when does it get bloated. So there's a sweet spot in there where everybody's balled in, everybody's enthusiastic, but the project still has to meet, the original intention of it.
Excellent. Let's take a second to poll the audience. What is your biggest challenge in aligning digital and physical touch points? Give folks a chance to answer there. Let's see what we got.
I figured this was going to be the case. It's what I would answer. All of these, a little bit of all of these.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point, because there are a number of challenges when, standing up an effective omnichannel ecosystem, and you can't just hit on one thing. I think you brought up a great point, Jenna, on, having that centralized data repository, then also just making sure that there is the necessary integration, leveraging APIs to have that single source of truth. And then bringing together those organizational silos. Can't say it enough. The technology is all there. Everything we want to do, we are able to do for the most part today. What the biggest challenge often is getting that internal alignment to the North Star, and just making sure you begin with the end in mind there, and ensuring that all the different functions who are going to be involved in ensuring success with your omnichannel strategy, that they're on board with where it's headed, because that's one of the key things to really determine whether we're able to bring through some of these insights we get from all these digital touch points into the field sales organization, for example. So great. Okay. Before we go to this next question, maybe we can talk a little bit about, in real world experience in doing this, how can organizations design and refine proof of concept campaigns for omnichannel success? A lot of times we'll talk to customers who are early in their omnichannel journey or trying to build momentum about, focusing on those quick win opportunities. So Bracy, thoughts on what organizations can do to really refine those proof of concepts?
Yeah, I probably won't come as any surprise, but I always think of starting with outcomes first. So what is the final thing we want to get to? What is our North Star? And let's plan backwards from there. So I like the idea of starting out with very aspirational, very blue sky outcomes, and this is what we want to achieve, because if you start too low, you kind of never get there. The idea of starting out big, you also have to be realistic that there are going to be things, as in the last kind of question, stakeholders will have different requirements. We might get diluted because our budget goes down. Some of our technology might not quite be there, but you have to have a North Star, and that North Star has to be the final outcome, and you're always marching towards that. So that's kind of how I think about it, from a data, from an outcomes perspective, and how I've seen it be successful in the past.
Excellent. All right, let's go to another poll to the audience. How far along is your organization in breaking down data silos? Just getting started, some progress, but still siloed, significant progress, but not fully integrated, or fully integrated? Really curious to see the responses for this one. All right, so interesting. So about 25% of you are just getting started. And then some are, making progress, but still working through those silos. And then 50% have made significant progress. That's great to hear. And also kind of not surprising that not everyone is fully integrated. I think of this as this in and of itself is a journey, and you're almost never finished. It's a almost living, breathing animal that you need to feed and nourish to get the most out of it. But wanted to kick it over to Jenna and Bracy. Maybe Jenna, thoughts on some of the responses we got here?
Yeah, I think, I just went to Fierce Pharma Week. I don't know if anyone on the call was there, but it was interesting to see big companies, large companies, small, startups where they are. And I feel like this represents what I learned there at the conference. This really is a cross-functional, company-wide initiative. I think, the big thing here is that you can do all of this work to connect the data. I think the understanding of what connected data means to the marketing teams is probably less understood. So just to give, some examples of, if there's engagement data that we're getting and we want to share that with the field, well, like maybe sometimes it's just a little too soon to share that data with the field, right? So you need to make sure that the team that's setting up all the systems, your marketing team, your sales team's kind of on board on, how this engagement data might be shared. So maybe you want to put an HCP into a nurture stream and gauge their interest a little bit. They just maybe clicked on a button. It's too soon to pick up the phone and run into the office, right? So, it's the breaking down the data silos, but then it's also the engagement surrounding that. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
I think that's such an important point. And we see it in all types of marketing, not just healthcare, but just the fact that the sheer amount of data and is the ease of connecting it. I think it becomes even larger of a problem is, oh, we saw a doctor go to this website and click on this ad. We are going to tell everybody who has a relationship with this doctor they clicked on an ad. And sometimes it's, you have to think, sure, we can do it, but should we do it? And that's where you have to be thoughtful about the strategic reason on why you're collecting, surfacing, and activating on data. And again, that's where being smart, strategic, and having the right statistics and analytics in place are what's important. I've had a lot of opportunities to deliver engagement to field force, and only a handful of times does it really resonate. And that's when it's been cultivated in a way that it's going to be relevant for them, and visualized in a way that's kind of a quick view. They don't want to sift through 9 pages of Excel sheets. They just want to have a brief, quick check-in on what they've looked at, and choose their own adventure from there, because they're professional sales reps and field force. So there's a balance, like there is anything else, and I think that's where it goes back to with breaking down the silos is so important, is knowing what is meaningful to each one of the stakeholders and delivering that in a way that's going to be useful.
And just to add, John, we've been talking a lot about sales and marketing, right? Like omnichannel, when you look at this from the customer's point of view, it's always that we as a company are touching the customer. So that might be medical, that might integrate your PR and comms team, right? So just to think of it broader. So, even those that might have significant progress but not fully integrated, maybe there's still some opportunity when you look at it from the customer's perspective, all the different touch points across functions.
Absolutely. 100%.
That's great. Here's a question from the audience. What's the fastest way to start breaking down those silos without overcomplicating things?
Take that one, Bracy.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and I think if I had it perfectly nailed, we'd be doing very well. So it's it's a difficult thing, and I think at the end of the day, communication is a big piece of it, and communicating the value proposition of why you're doing it. Oftentimes, a lot of people that have worked with me in the past, I get very excited about data, as you would imagine. And sometimes I kind of skip the basics and jump to things a little bit further further down the maturity curve. And, you have to explain things and the value proposition of doing it in a way that's going to be digestible and useful for, the end stakeholder. If you go to the example that we just talked about, where, we're delivering engagement to field force for an HCP, they should know the use case on what they should do with it, what they have to do with it, what they don't have to do with it, and paint a clear picture. More importantly, get requirements from them on what would be most useful within those data. That's where you start to see less of doing things because you have to and doing things because it's important. You build in requirements from those stakeholders in the beginning, and you have a really nice campaign.
So I can add, from being on the brand, the client side, to having done this at a few companies, what's I found most effective is really a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. So you need to have all the way to the CEO, right, that this is something we're investing in. You are expected to use this. You are expected to work together as teams. And then each functional leader, including medical, PR, sales, marketing, they all need to be bought in. And I recommend having a champion who's involved along the way, building this all out, and can be the champion for each of those functions. The other part of this is, marketers who have been classically trained as I would, as a marketer who builds sales aids and maybe a digital sales aid if you're really fancy, right? This is really new for a lot of people. So I think as we look at what we all expect in the world today and what that should look like for pharma marketing, the example that I always use is that, when I order a pair of shoes from Zappos, like, they know exactly what I ordered before. They know maybe what I might like in the future. They send me messages along the way that it's been delivered. I'm now in the VIP club, right? So we're all used to that with everything that we engage with, and pharma really is no different. If anything, you want a more personalized experience. Mm-hmm. So to start to build that, we need to really show marketers what this will look like in 3 years, and start to build out to that and give examples of that, like real world examples. I see slides lots of times on this is what we're doing, and they're pretty roadmaps, and there's all of these cool you know, like, here's what we're doing when, but it's like, if we don't really put this into a tangible way, that here's what our customers are going to experience and here's how we take advantage of it so that we create that personalized experience at scale, marketers are just not going to get it. It just looks like a bunch of stuff on a slide.
Jenna, I think that's such a good example. And, you know, the other part of personalization, sometimes it's not just knowing what to say, but it's knowing what not to say or when not to say anything. And again, it goes back to, you know, marketers have technology and marketers want to use the technology and sometimes to our own demise. But we should, you know, there's a lot of times where we don't need to talk to a doctor. Talking to a doctor might, you know, peel them back from the brand. And again, we have such good data connected in such a way, we can tell how doctors are reacting to different types of marketing, whether it's mass marketing, whether it's non-personal, or whether it's, you know, field force. So sometimes it's better not to say anything, you know, and that in and of itself is personalized. We know about this person, that their preference is a light communication with field force instead of a, you know, heavy bombardment of, you know, digital marketing campaigns.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Moving on to our next question. What about aligning and building consensus at the team level? How is important is this step in really breaking down those silos and creating those connected experiences? I'll kind of share an example of, you know, from my past when I was client side. And really, you know, as I think about it, many of what we do well as organizations is built around our functional silos, right? So we have marketing team that's aligned to deliver marketing materials and messaging. We have a sales team that's aligned to deliver, you know, the face-to-face interaction. We have an MSL team to deliver scientific content. We have PR team to do what they do, distribution team to do what they do, customer service to do what they do, and to really orchestrate that connected experience. You can't think in that top-down approach. You really have to think horizontally. And how am I going to make sure each person at the functional level is doing their part to connect this experience so that it feels unified, like that Zappos, you know, shoe ordering experience, that someone took the time to map that journey and not just look at it from the journey of purchase, but the journey within the organization and how the functions within the organizations had to connect and interact in order to deliver that experience to that end user. And that's a lot of what we need to do before we start diving into everything. Is once you understand that journey and you've done that journey research, the next thing to think about is like, okay, what are all of the functional touch points that are going to happen as that HCP, that caregiver, that patient goes through that journey? And how can I make sure that I'm gaining trust at each one of those touch points? And at minimum, you know, maintaining trust, but we definitely don't want to have those situations where they're interacting with any one of those many touch points that I just mentioned and actually losing trust in the process, because especially in healthcare, it's really the foundation for everything. So, you know, breaking down those silos is really critical. And I don't know, Jenna, thoughts on how to build that consensus at the team level in order to be able to do that?
I do. I agree with everything that you said from your experience, Pat. You know, one thing that has surprised me over and over again, I guess it shouldn't, but it's more of the internal experience. And there are people at companies that have built their careers around one system, right? And they're very attached to that system, and that's their baby, right? Like, they created that. And now all of a sudden we're saying we're going to change this, and it's omnichannel. We're going to be doing this. And I've heard this over and over from my colleagues at other companies, that it's really scary and upsetting to some people internally that we're making these changes, and not everyone is comfortable with change. And we talked about, you know, change management and those types of things. So it's not only amongst, you know, the marketing team leadership, but it's also amongst the, you know, the people that we hope are going to stay with us and help, you know, build this together with us. So that's my thought there. I don't know why it keeps surprising me, but it does. I don't know if others on the call are experiencing that too.
Something else I see is the attempt to make decisions by consensus. We want to bring everybody into the fold, and we want everybody to have a voice. But if you're going to make true and rapid change in an organization, there needs to be a final decision maker. And that's why a kind of top-down leadership, an executive level sponsor for some of these is so important, because at the end of the day, this is going to touch different silos of organizations. It's going to touch different people. Jenny, you made a really good point. It's going to change people's technology, kind of fingerprint that they're using in the organization that they've gotten comfortable with. And those are things that you're going to naturally find organizational friction in, and have a hard time getting to a consensus. So if you have a very strong leader, as an executive sponsor who will break ties, will veto bad decisions, and move the project forward, it's going to be infinitely faster than if you're trying to make it through consensus.
Excellent. Moving on to the next question, and this is kind of tied to some questions we've gotten from the audience here related to KPIs. How can organizations measure the success of their omnichannel strategies? Maybe Bracy, do you want to start with this one? Thinking about those outcomes you were alluding to in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, KPIs in pharma is so interesting. Again, pharma in data is just fascinating. The information we have access to. There are, a bunch of different layers of KPIs. So the North Star that you should always look towards is incremental script lift, whether it's MBX, TRX. But there's an actual real cost to looking at incrementality, and that's because you have to have a holdout. So if you think in terms of HCP, you have to not give messaging to certain HCPs in order to judge what is the incremental effect of us delivering a communication or a field force to those HCPs. Had you sent that, you would have gotten that same outcome from those HCPs. I personally believe that cost is well worth it, because if you don't understand the incrementality of your efforts, how do you ever know you're successful and it wasn't some sort of extraneous factor? Within pharma as well, for most drugs, the time to prescription in between impression and prescription, or in between visit and prescription, is going to be way too long for any of us in marketing to be able to kind of optimize our campaigns towards. So we need things which are more real time in nature. So we think of an ensemble approach when we think of outcomes in incrementality and KPIs with pharma. So whether that leading indicator is a high value action on a website, whether it is if we're talking media, whether it's audience quality, if we're talking, field force, whether it's, percent detailed or engagement or length of the visit, those are the things you want to track to get you in the right cardinal direction. And then you want to, at the period of time that your data volume allows for, double check and make sure that cardinal direction is right with incremental outcomes. That's generally the way that we set up our measurement campaigns within pharma, is that kind of ensemble approach of faster twitch, leading indicators, longer term incremental outcomes.
Excellent. Jenna, any words of wisdom to add there?
Absolutely. So on the client side, just thinking about the KPI planning, and agree that needs to be done up front, and determine what you're going to not only measure, because you could have so many metrics, and I saw the question in the chat about reliable lagging indicators, right? It's going to be different depending on where you are in the brand's life cycle as well. So if you're trying to get awareness out about your product, your KPIs are going to be very different than if you are using media or using digital for an adherence strategy, right? So it's ultimately, yes, it's going to be maybe a compliance metric in the end that would be your lagging indicator, and it would be a script lift for the awareness campaigns and everything like that. But it's really different. And then it's very important, whether it's a PowerPoint, whatever it is, to have some sort of dashboard that that your executives, other brand team members have access to and have agreement on how often metrics are going to be available. So a campaign doesn't launch and 2 days later, your executives are asking, where are the metrics? So that's my other tip there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the effort it takes in order to answer those questions within the first week of a campaign is, having been somebody who has answered those questions in the first couple of weeks of a campaign, it does take so much time. So being thoughtful in the kind of upfront data management, making sure that your data are clean, your taxonomy is in the right place. So you can have automation within the first week of a campaign instead of waiting, 3 months and having an army of analysts behind the scene cobbling Excel sheets together. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that one up too.
Here's another one from the audience, and kind of is tangentially connected to what you were talking about a moment ago, Bracy. In terms of like the best way to test new channels without blowing your budget. So how do you do the test and learn while kind of maintaining some powder for the overall performance of the omnichannel approach?
That's a very good question. So there's a few different ways to approach experimentation, just in general. And I don't think this necessarily only applies to pharma, but it certainly is important with pharma because of the level of detail we have. I like the idea of a champion and challenger whenever it's possible. So if we have I'll talk about creative because that's a natural place for, I'll talk about channels later, so we can do that a little bit differently. But if we're thinking about a piece of creative, and we always know that an efficacy message has won, our testing in perpetuity, well, maybe we want to test real world data, in addition to that efficacy message. So we do that, and if efficacy is always the champion and we're always testing and we never beat it, that means the first decision we made was the right decision. And that's great. That's a learning that we have, and that is not a negative, and no budget was blown doing that, because now we know, let's say for the next 6 months, that we stick to that message and we really nail it and sing it from the mountains. If we do talk about channels, it becomes a little bit differently. I think that's where part of the heart of the question comes from too, is, we don't want to have ourselves too overextended in any sort of channel, whether it's digital or terrestrial. And that's where either agile ROIs or media mix modeling really can come into play. So you can test out without having holdouts, without having too large of a footprint in any one of these channels. What is the relevant ROI of, say, a display campaign on Doximity versus a email campaign? And that way you're not having holdouts, you're not having this very complex test design and matrix. You're just looking at the statistics that's telling us, put more money in display because that's what's driving, your outcomes. So that's generally how I think about it. You kind of have to think differently depending on what the case is. Channels, I'm thinking more of statistics and modeling. When you're thinking in terms of creative, I love a good champion and challenger approach to it.
Excellent. Okay, shifting gears to our last question here, and then we'll kind of summarize as I see we're coming up on time. What are the benefits of consolidating marketing operations under one integrated system? Jenna, thoughts on that?
I'd love to talk about that. So my entire career, I've worked at companies where different aspects of digital has been farmed out to different companies. So, traditionally you'd have a media agency, then you'd have a creative agency, and then you might have a MarTech agency, maybe a different one that does paid search, right? Because they're specialists in that. I spent more of my time coordinating agencies than actually focusing on the strategy in those cases. So, I have found benefit to consolidating agencies. I think you have to figure out what works best for your company, but some of the efficiencies that I've seen in having one company do the majority of the elements of that, and them, forcing them to talk amongst themselves, right? To be like, hey, look, your team has that information. I'm going to need you to go over there. But, just even having like the media, the analytics, and the creative connected has been a huge advantage. I will say I was a little nervous and skeptical before doing it because I had never done it before, but I can tell you it has worked out.
Excellent.
If
That's
you
great.
couldn't guess
And, you know,
what I'm using, that wasn't obvious.
And as a practitioner, it certainly makes it, a lot simpler. If the person building the creative is, digitally sitting right next to me, and I can speak to them and give them nuances that I don't have to deliver in a report, I can send in a Slack message. That it's kind of like latency of the data, but the latency of the information, we can be a lot more real time giving those insights in order, to drive better creative, to drive better MarTech. And Pat and I talk about it all the time. It's easier for us, and there's only one neck to squeeze when things don't go right. So like it's a greater accountability, and it's something we take a lot of pride in when we do get those opportunities.
Yeah, the other thing we talk about a lot with clients is the importance of like harmonizing and normalizing the data from all those sources. So, having that single source of truth is really helpful in that regard too, so that you can really see how your target audiences are moving through the journey, and understanding where those lags might be. And by having that data normalized and harmonized, you get a clarity of insight to how the system overall is performing, which allows you to move more quickly to address areas of opportunity or to capitalize on areas where we're seeing maybe greater lift than we originally anticipated. So there's a lot of I think benefit that can be gained from thinking about Omnichannel as a system. And really, when you're creating that system, how can I optimize this engine for its best overall performance? And so as we wrap up, we wanted to kind of give you all some quick key takeaways. First, map the HCP and patient journey, aligning the digital online and offline touch points like email, print, and field visits to create those seamless and connected customer experiences. Break down those silos, integrate your CRM, your sales and marketing data to address those MPI interactions, to be able to make sure that those MPI interactions are as high value as possible, to improve that engagement and improve that overall collaboration. Make sure you're piloting, find those test and learn opportunities, those A/B tests where, champion challenger, as Bracy was saying, so that you can constantly be looking for those unexploited opportunities. And then measure success holistically, track those KPIs, make sure you're aligned on the KPIs up front. It's a lot easier to get that alignment up front and then architect the system to deliver those KPIs than to not have alignment and clarity on the KPIs and then try to reverse engineer to find those KPIs at the end. So some key learnings from experience from our esteemed guests here. And I want to thank again Jenna Rodewald and John Bracy for a very productive conversation about Omnichannel. And we hope everyone found it as enjoyable as we have. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, everyone, for joining as well and for sharing these great insights. Again, the audience, thank you so much for tuning in.